All right, welcome to Free Radical Radio. I'm here doing an interview with Aragorn of Little Black Cart Publishing, which can be found at littleblackcart.com. And this is version number 2. We just lost an hour of recording as Free Radical Radio has taken their technical difficulties all across the bay, basically. So, how are you doing, Aragorn?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, before we get into it, about who LBC is and what you do there? Just explaining the project to people that maybe, if they haven't purchased a book or seen you at a book fair.
Yeah, Little Black Cart started as a project around 2007-ish, out of a need for a more generic distribution option for Anarchy, a Journal of Desire Armed magazine. At the time, me and my partner were editors at Ajoda, and we saw the need generally for there being alternate resources for people to access the magazine, but immediately our goal was to sort of be a one-stop shopping for all the anarchist content you couldn't get other places. And so just as an example, at that time, the review section of Ajoda would have tons and tons of stuff that you just couldn't get anywhere unless you directly contacted the author. And so we were trying to basically do a very author-centric distribution.
And so it was all basically distribution in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, do you want to talk about how you decide to move forward from there?
Well, a couple years after 2007, we left Anarchy magazine, and we knew a couple things after that split happened. One is that we wanted to do more than Ajoda was doing, not less. And second, that the need for a sort of single shop was absolutely needed. But that the real problem with anarchist publishing at that time, and maybe even now, is that gap between sort of creating a PDF or creating some content and making that content go into people's hands, that gap is a huge gap. And so I mean, there's plenty of precocious young people who can make a PDF of a neat, interesting project, but the likelihood that anybody's ever going to see it, and so for us, because our interest and we're fans of perspectives that are unpopular even in the anarchist space, and especially that was true in 2007. The space has moved in our direction, not away from us. So there was a need to basically get involved in more of how do we transmit this content to people, and what's funny is when we were part of Ajoda, so Anarchy had been published by the same person for 20 to 25 years, and he gave up the publishing to this new collective. And part of what he said was the motivation for doing it was that he was interested in publishing books.
Oh.
So at the time, kind of the joke, at least inside my head, was, is publishing a newspaper what you do when you're young, and publishing books what you do when you're old, and perhaps that's true, because it does somewhat relate to the topic of that magazines are built to be temporary, to be in the bathroom for as long as it takes for them to get destroyed in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Whereas books have this different cadence to them.
Yeah. So what were some of the pitfalls that you all hit early on in the beginning, or were any lessons you learned that you feel like were important?
Well, in the beginning, before we were publishing our own material, there was no money at all. It was entirely out of my pocket. And so in other words, the math of distribution is that you get 50% of, usually, like if a thing is $8, you get the wholesale rate, which is half of that $8, and then you hope to get $8 back from it. So that's $4 that you've quote unquote profited, but we would spend that easily just in traveling expenses. One of the first events we did as Little Black Cart was I think one of the last encores, and just a plane ticket, you totally blew any possibility of profiting, quote unquote, from the thing, and to use not anarchistic language, the lesson we continue to learn about Little Black Cart, that's an incredibly painful lesson, is how important something called marketing is.
Yeah, what is I mean, so what does your marketing look like? That's a problem we have on the radio, mostly because me and Bellamy hate it, but
Mm-hmm.
and we're probably just not good at it, to be honest, and don't
Mm-hmm.
know much about it. Those are the other limitations for us. So
Okay. Well, again, we do have an antecedent, and that antecedent was a lot of why we started Little Black Heart to begin with. So there are lessons to be learned from radical publishers and their quote unquote marketing or lack thereof. And so, step one, visibility. To the extent to which there are anarchist places where you can be visible, i.e., book fairs, you have to be visible. And visibility is not just sitting at a table, two doofuses staring at strangers. It's something more than that. I'm not exactly sure, but it's something more than that. I can tell you for a fact that watching PM Press have 7+ tables at the San Francisco Book Fair
right.
was alarming, informing, and
yeah, the wing.
But actually they're a good example of how to do marketing. They are every I'll spin this as a positive here, whereas obviously in other places I would talk about this as a negative thing. But like any single arena in which they feel like they have a content overlap, they're unashamed about developing that relationship. So I imagine you can't go to a vegan event in North America and there not be some sort of PM Press presence. PM Press is very active in publishing stale old leftist stuff, and that means that they're at every sort of like old traditional the left forum and things like that. And so I think that for anarchists, we tend to just stick to anarchist only events, and I think that there is a vision of our future that looks like us being a bit more aggressive in terms of just exposing ourselves to people who are weird to us, but who that we do have something in common with.
Do you want to talk about some of those people who or they might be, or what that could look like?
Well, I think two examples that come to mind for me is, one, I think that we should be a bit more involved in Berkeley/college life. From my perspective, our demographic skews young, and it skews towards people who are open to new ideas rather than people who already have committed to a set of ideas and just want to buy all the products around that idea. So, so I think that a book like, most of our pocket books, especially the ones with a sort of nihilistic sort of theme, would sell well to a certain college demographic.
You mean like Elephant Edition? Those?
I think those, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because of the aesthetics of those for sure. But I also think that something like Attentat or Hostis, that's sort of like, what is this? This is small and neat, and what is this? And then the other option that's that calls itself anarchistic is somewhere in the space of the left libertarians. There are a series of events that they do and participate in, that I think that there's some conversations that we could open up to those people.
Where do you see that overlap, particularly in that segment?
Well, we have I would say a friendly relationship to the website C4SS,
Yeah.
which they've done some really nice reviews of and very attentive, just solid reviews of a couple of our books, including Novatore,
Okay.
I think the Labadie book, and I think Enemies.
Huh. Yeah, and can you explain who they are again a little bit?
Well, the C4SS stands for the Center for a Stateless Society. Now, obviously, stateless is a code that sort of means open to economic relationships. And so, we take a more or less traditional stand that by some definition would be an anarcho-communist definition, that we're opposed to economic relationships. But we live in this world, which is a world of economic relationships, and so we participate in them in this world. But our future world would look like a world without economic relationships. the C4SS, which is a website, they're much more loosey goosey around these topics. Their tradition, they have a rich tradition, and of total lunatics, and so in that way it's kind of interesting, and I'm not hostile to it at all. Labadee is arguably in that tradition, which is why Labadee made sense as an overlap. But so is Spooner and Tucker, who are other figures that we wouldn't necessarily touch. Which is worth pursuing. But the point is that they want to talk about economics and ATR economics, and we have no interest in that.
You mean after the revolution?
Yeah. And
yeah. So let's jump back to the college thing a little bit. It's kind of interesting because there's this whole interesting relationship anarchy has with academics, where I think a lot of people would maybe argue that post-anarchism comes straight out of academia, where in many other ideas that's just one of them in particular. But and I guess maybe do you see Black Seed as trying to open up some hostility towards that with some anthropology stuff that's been going on, and what does it mean more or less to have a relationship with academia without being caught up in all the critiques of it?
Well, this is a great time for us as a publisher to reach the academic audience, because anyone who's in grad school and is thinking about grad school type of ideas has basically retreated from the dream that many people have, which is that they're going to go to grad school, then get a tenure track position, and then live a life of beautiful co-eds and long coffees and wood paneled rooms with lots of books on the shelves. And so as that vision of a future has become more and more impoverished, and as precariousness has become the phenomena of almost all these people who have these postgraduate degrees, many of them were working on really interesting ideas when they were in grad school. I would like to publish these ideas, absolutely. There's a lot out there that I would love to publish. Most of these people are waiting to sort of publish with a publisher like us to see if they have any chance at a future, at an economically a career type of future, which means that they have to publish their books, with a mainstream academic publisher. But as those people fall off, I mean, we're totally available to pick them up. I mean, they're going to be really good matches once that happens. That said, post-anarchism and obviously we cover this in the failed
interview.
Post-anarchism and post-left anarchism are two entirely different creatures. They come from very different spaces. Obviously, we are associated with post-left anarchism, although it's not our label for ourselves. But we do carry a lot of post-left anarchist material, and even publish some of it. The post-left anarchism comes out of a reaction to the relationship, let's say, between anarchism and communism in the Marxist sense of the word. And post-left anarchism comes as a way to sort of cleave that relationship as a terminology. Post-anarchism comes out of an understanding that post-structuralist ideas and the authors associated with post-structuralist ideas, which by and large is a arena that's only interesting to graduate students.
Yeah.
But that post-structuralism has a lot to offer anarchism, and they're right. It does have a lot to offer anarchism, but it's not a movement. It's not a cleave within the anarchist space. It's not really a cleave at all. It's basically an attempt to sort of, some people would say, to mainstream anarchist ideas by writing dissertations and writing papers in a field that makes sense in the academy, i.e. on post-structuralist ideas, but to have a modern informing by way of anarchism.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about post-anarchism as being less hostile, because when I do read it, I do feel it almost, the post-left stuff, which I fall into that category obviously, but is in somewhere in that vagueness. It does tend to feel a bit reactionary, which I think,
yeah.
which I think I don't know. Is that something you feel like you guys at LBC have been able to move beyond, or like where you were reacting before and you weren't now, or was that never really felt like an issue?
I uh, uh, my life story looks like a reactionary life story in the way that many of the fights that are implied by post-left anarchism have been fights that I have personally participated in a variety of different projects over the years. And this includes taking part in formal federations and trying to make the post-left arguments within that context. This looks like involving myself in several different unfriendly publishing type projects, workspaces, etc., etc. I've always been the lightning rod of anti-organizational critiques, of critiques against leftism. But I would say that the end of my tenure at Ajota has one of the conclusions I came to at the end of that tenure was that I feel as though the era of critique that my own personal relationship with critique, I was ready to transform it.
Into what would you say, or
I
would you say LBC describes that?
I would say that's. I mean, LBC is publishes a lot of critiques, so there's
Right.
no other way to say that. But personally, I wrote about this in Attentat, so if it's in a piece called Critique of Critique.
Okay. One of the things I want to get to is the general quality of anarchist writing and where you think that fits into, because clearly, if what it would seem logically to follow, if you're an anarchist, that seems like, if it's the beautiful idea, if it's the thing you're searching for, that the writing for it should be of high quality, and it should be something that people feel when they read it, maybe, or but obviously there's a lot of trash as there's with any type of writing. But where do you see most of this existing right now? People who are really able to communicate. If the whole idea of writing is to communicate and publishing is to help spread this communication to other people, where do you see the highest levels of communication existing right now, or expression?
Boy, these are very different. Yeah, you're definitely traveling around a little bit to get to a question mark.
Yeah.
I think that the Invisible Committee and Robert Hurley's translation of the Invisible Committee is fantastic writing. But that might be a different question than the one that you're trying to ask, because there's sort of a couple different categories. There's beautiful writing.
Mm-hmm.
There's inspired writing. There's functional writing. A lot of what we publish is functional writing. Like, I would say that Alejandro's book, The Impossible Patience, is beautiful writing. A lot of people don't like it politically, that who've given me their half-assed feedback, and they have nothing else to say other than that they basically can't get past the flowery prose. But literature is nothing but fucking flowery prose. A lot of times the ideas themselves are impoverished compared to the prose. So this middle category, which is effective writing, I think Nihilist Communism is a perfect example of effective writing. They have a politic that they're trying to communicate, and part of communicating a difficult or new idea to people involves a shit ton of repetition,
mm-hmm.
and attempting to approach the same question from different perspectives. Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle is effective writing. It's not incredibly flowery in the way that Vandekam's treatise is, and so Nikon is a very effective piece of writing. Yet another category that anarchists, of course, excel in is the propagandistic writing, which isn't sort of meant to be read like sitting down with a book and a pipe and and a dog at your feet, but is meant to basically, in a punchy way, communicate a perspective that it's encouraging you to participate in. We publish some of that too. I mean, Fire to the Prisons is nothing if not that kind of writing.
Yeah. Call to arms.
Yeah. So I guess I think about these questions, but they're not exactly where we put our feet on. I would say that my favorite books that we published have been the poetic books.
Yeah. So you're talking about propaganda a little bit. What has it really meant to be doing such a, I guess, big propaganda project? If the whole project is essentially putting anarchist ideas into the hands of living human beings.
That would be the goal. Yeah.
Yeah. But where do you see that connected? Do you see that as separate from what like movement type anarchists are doing by spreading propaganda, by being on the streets and protesting and doing all these things? And like, do you see even any connection at all between these two things?
Well, I mean, there is a connection. If I were going to be very generous to the protesting crowd, I would say that they are attempting to test out ideas, theories that they have. They are experimenting with those ideas on the streets, and so, perhaps we are closer to the place of attempting to theorize an idea than we are to putting them into practice. But I feel like a lot of what we publish is about people who make that transition. That's what Freedom I Dream is all about. Is like, I had an idea. The idea was called freedom. This is how I was compelled to live that idea in this situation, in this situation, in this situation. That's called a life. Whereas sometimes when you talk to someone who we're referring to in this context as an activist, it's unclear why they're doing what they're doing, other than that they have this compulsion to do that thing. Like the theory isn't particularly fleshed out.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to more get into like what I like to call an honest assessment of the situation, or like where things sit right now. So as you're looking like from the point of view of a publisher of anarchy, or a spreader of the idea of anarchy, or the ideas, assuming there's many of them, which hopefully there are. What do you see the current climate as, especially living in or being in around the Bay Area, where it's where there's so many different perspectives and a lot of them end up morphing into each other?
It's hostile. It's a hostile time for the beautiful idea. I think that there's a variety of ways to talk about this. I'll start with talking about the Bay Area. Right now, the most interesting project, not anarchist, the most interesting project happening in the part of the Bay Area we live in is the Omni.
Mm-hmm.
The Omni is basically an anti-state communist project that's hiding behind the fact that it's also like a community center where you can do yoga and learn about the newest Marxist poetry book that just came out.
Or have a science lab or a kitchen. They're very multifaceted.
Right. It's also a place where you can make vegan cheese.
Yeah.
where computer hackers are doing their thing.
Right.
And that experimental movies are being shown. So that's a fantastic project. It's conceptually very interesting, and it's not anarchist, and it could have been in the early days of it. So what that gets me to thinking about is the fact that a lot of anarchist projects fail because of timing. Anarchists tend to either be sort of late to the program, or early to the program and burned out by the time it matters. So just to talk shit for a second, or not really, but if anarchists were very smart around Occupy, by which I mean they appropriately placed the General Assembly in a figurehead and more or less irrelevant but emotionally fulfilling role. And this was an anarchist strategy that did this, and basically emphasized the action component of Occupy as being what people did in the streets. This was very smart. Tactics very strong, very good. Second, but because the GA was the main public entry point to where people thought things were happening, anarchism showed total poverty, because consensus basically demonstrated itself to not be particularly effective or a good way to do a lot of different types of problem solving. And because consensus has been so universally asserted as the anarchist decision-making model, by the end of Occupy, most people were exhausted by what they saw anarchism as meaning. I think that anarchism has not recovered in any way, shape, or form since Occupy. That the sort of that the insurrectionary excitement of the 2000s spent its breath, like its last breath was spent infusing Occupy with some energy, and then it had no more breath left.
Yeah, would you almost see that GA experience as just a straight up problem with anarchists running into a mass issue, even just a mass of like 200 or 300 people, where it's very difficult to even get something to happen there?
Well, I think that there's plenty of counterexamples, like in the Seattle moment, in the anti-globe era. There were plenty of examples of disciplined consensus-esque based methodology. The problem is that the the European style open assembly came crashing against the anarchistically informed consensus decision making to make a mess. But I wouldn't draw an immediate clear conclusion out of this. Like, I would say that my anarchism doesn't make decisions with 200 people all that often, and when they do, they're very simple. Probably they're fight or don't fight.
Yeah.
Or and so to the extent to which it was an assembly in the European model, it fucking succeeded fantastically. But the problem is that a lot of executive branch minded people wanted to make it some, had other motivations, and yeah.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about, or will you talk a little bit about how LBC kind of deals with that question of consensus?
Right. I feel like I just spoke 10 minutes about this an hour ago. So Little Black Cart, me and the other members of Little Black Cart have had a 20 plus year, in some cases 30 plus year, set of experiences around consensus decision making and around the Bay Area and around what does it mean to do anarchist decision making. So we come at this conversation with a lot of examples. I in particular, I worked in a live place that did formal consensus for a couple years. I lived in a place that did formal consensus for a couple years, and since then have probably been a part of 2 or 3 other formal projects and a half dozen informal consensus projects. So Little Black Cart does not do consensus. Consensus has sort of become code over the years for for anarchist decision making, period, rather than something that people sort of develop or think about or have an opinion about. And partially this is because formal consensus, it's hard to avoid Christians when you dig into what formal consensus looks like. They're the ones who did a lot of the theoretical work. The ones who aren't Christians, and in particular the ones in my history, were Maoists. And so this is why most anarchists have a revulsion towards formal consensus, because the people who wrote all the documentations aren't anarchists. There have been a couple of attempts. I think Gelderos actually wrote a book on consensus, but he mostly draws on the Christian rule set. So this is the Quakers versus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm actually writing a book about this right now, and particularly about the methodology that we're trying to think about. One of the conflicts I'm coming into, by the way, is the fact that a lot of people who have experience with consensus or with anarchist decision making over time have ended up doing something similar to what it is that we've done. They just still call it consensus because because consensus means anarchist decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, with that said, what we call our model is PRDM, which is an open acronym, and it's partially informed by agile software development, and it's partially motivated by the principle of working with people who you disagree with as a principle. In other words, one of the ideas that's at the heart of consensus, which is one of the frustrations with consensus, is that it assumes that everybody agrees. But we almost never agree. Or if we agree, it's not for the same reasons. So this is at the heart of the tension that PRDM is trying to develop which, another way to put it would be autonomy is more important than um, uniformity. Little Black Heart is actually broken up into 3 different organizational units, 3 different groups. This is print, distro, editorial, and the 3 different groups, day to day, are autonomous. They do not. There's very little requirement for to go back to a central body, and their domains that they work on are different. The print shop makes books, the distro sells books, and editorial, well, also makes books, but it makes PDFs that then the print shop prints.
Yeah. So what does that look like, I guess, to finding content, really, or where have you found? Do you feel like you found the most success in finding content and finding voices that you want to amplify?
Well, the real answer to that is 25 years of personal relationships and with who I befriended over those years. And so, well, yeah, I mean that's at the heart of it. Almost all of our successful projects have been people I've known for a decade or more. That said, as we've sort of grown and we've published 40 books in the past 3.5 years, so we're doing something.
Yeah.
And as we've done that, we have slowly started to attract interesting people who have worked with us. We now work with this guy named Isaac Cronin, who was actually an early Bay Area post-situationist. His pedigree, basically extends to 1970, and that's a perfect person for us to work with.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in the Dead interview too. But what do you kind of see as the landscape right now? You're kind of differentiating between strains or tendencies of anarchy in the publishing world, and how that affects where books and authors go.
Yeah, I mean, the way I said last time, it's one of my standard pitches. From my perspective, there are 2 kinds of anarchism. There's a glorious, beautiful, incredible, beautiful idea that died on the fields of Catalan in 1937. And then there's an anarchism that was born on the streets of Paris in 1968. And so we are a publisher of the second variety of anarchism, the one that was born in the streets of Paris. So just to speak to the first anarchism for a moment, that's an anarchism that's primarily a historical anarchism. It's one that continues to be interested in the interscene politics of the CNT-FAI. It's one that thinks that Marx and Bakunin are useful figures to talk about in 2015. The second wave of anarchism, which we have a pamphlet by that name, by the way. The second wave of anarchism begins by understanding why the situationists, what they were saying, what was compelling about what they were saying, and what their criticisms of anarchism were. And their criticisms of anarchism are my criticisms of anarchism. And they're stated clearly in Theses 93 to 100 of Society of the Spectacle. But, and so what we take from that is that we have 3 general areas of what we publish that are informed by the second wave of anarchism. And the first thing that we publish is situationist and post-situationist material. And this includes things like endnotes, it includes Tikkun, Invisible Committee, and post-situationist material. So Isaac Cronin is very much in that arena. The other 2 vertices, Green Anarchist ideas, and that whole body of thought. One of our imprints is the Green Anarchy from the paper. Mm-hmm. They have an imprint with us, and they've done a few books with us under that imprint. And then finally, the third vertice would be somewhere in the insurrectionary nihilist, the sort of new anarchisms. But even those new ideas are very old ideas.
Yeah, I think we talked about this more earlier, but just to what the relationship with I guess it's something I ask of you too, just for the ideas you espouse, but specifically more as a publisher, I guess this rise in people want to. I think a lot of people would call it a rise in like nihilism, egoism, anti-civ is some type of ancillary to that maybe, or overlapping thing with some of these ideas sometimes, and what that's meant in terms of like general hostility, especially as a reaction to those positivistic ideas when encountered by a first wave anarchist, I guess.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Trying to get into more what it means to have a project that's ended up feeling or being very hostile.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of that hostility is on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in fact, because I don't actually see their, like, 10 years ago, we were just talking about anti-civ. The big rise in conversations around egoism specifically is because of the publishing of Stirner's Critics, which we did a couple years ago, and as a result of that book expressed a lot of new scholarship around Stirner and his ideas, and so a new body of people were excited about this, and a new set of writers were talking about this sort of as a like the book represented the moment where a conversation began. I personally don't see almost any overlap between egoism and nihilism as a body of ideas. A lot of other people do. A lot of other people call themselves egoist nihilists.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true that, let's say, some of the, like, Novatori represents this incredible overlap between these bodies of ideas. But the way in which he lived, anyone who would call themselves an insurrectionary anarchist would also aspire to that form of life.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like the nirvana of
Of a type.
Of that particular type. Yeah.
So the point is that we're not trying to like on the level that you expressed it. We're not attempting to publish ideas that are hostile to anarchists. I mean, we're trying to excite conversations, not dampen them at all. And more pointedly, like the goal is for people to take these things and do something with them. I mean, for me, the publishing of The Sovereign Self, which was only for like a year and a half or so, that was perfect. That was a wonderful, I heard about this new thing. I'm excited about it. I'm going to do something about it, and that, to me, that's the goal. I want to see an anarchist field of people trying new kinds of experiments and playing them out, not just sitting in a room and talking shit and whatever, going to bed or something like for me, the greatest failure has been how little anarchist activity there has been as a result of these ideas. But there has been a lot more than one would expect, given how small we are.
Do you see any of this experimentation happening right now? Like, I guess maybe some type of like play or like any type of creative aspects instead of just the usual, like, we did this thing and we're upset about it and you're fucked up for these reasons, or like.
Well, almost every other episode of your podcast overlaps with some sort of thing that we're doing within the context of LBC. So that's an example. I mean, the fact that a political tendency I have nothing to do with, which is anarcho-primitivism, is absolutely obsessed with Little Black Cart as a something that it is in a dialectical relationship with. I mean, so we're definitely having an impact in terms of what the conversation is and where people's heads are at or whatever. But it's but it never looks sort of like in my perfect little world, because in there would be young people taking these ideas and running with them. Because the problem with that is that there are forces much larger than us that are also at play right now, and the internet is an incredible dampener of practice of experimenting with these ideas in a meaningful way. And the general tenor of the anarchism of the internet saying no to any possible new idea, that's much more powerful than what I believe is our attempt to say yes to a variety of different options.
Do you see I guess that must have had some effect on like this level of discourse, or So I'm kind of trying to get you deeper into this question of what things look like right now and how to have conversations. And I guess I don't know if was Black Seed partially an attempt to like get things a little bit off the internet or
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
We've done a couple projects prior to Black Seed that were analog only, that were paper only. Most of Attentat is paper only. But we've been doing this for a little while because I feel very convinced that there's a quality and quantity thing happening right now, and that the quality of what people are experiencing on the internet is so impoverished and so low that I can understand why someone would experience anarchism on the internet and be like, I know enough to be like, no, fuck no.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of these analog only projects is to reinscribe the face to face with value, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess that's bring me back to the situation that anarchy is still existing in right now. There's a few ways to look at it. There's people who I'm on the more talking theoretical end, obviously, and then at this point, then you have people like Bellamy's trying to do like a land project. And you have people doing all these different projects, and I'm just trying to figure out where the more interesting intersections of this are happening and where like things can be created, because oftentimes it feels like I know I can be guilty of being reactionary often, and how anarchy as an idea can I guess it's hard for it not to be reactionary on some level, because the entire existence of daily life is anarchy's in opposition to. Most strands of anarchy, at least, are in opposition to. So I guess where do you see any spaces being fillable by that right now, or by projects?
Well, I mean, I would say because of my age, I'm probably looking at these problems from a different perspective. I'm not looking at a life without meaning that I'm trying to inscribe with meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I've made some choices, and that's actually a hard thing for a lot of young people and a lot of people in general to sort of do, to say like, can I commit to a thing? By and large, I experience most people who come into my life as people who are trying very hard to be like, I want to know about this thing, but I do not want to commit to this thing. And that balance is sort of like the very modern sort of existential dilemma. But to be specific, if I were to read these books that we published today, or actually let me take it from a different perspective. Any experimentation that people are going to be able to do today have to be away from the big cities, probably away from the coasts, and involve dealing with people who are not your people necessarily. And I think that I'm not closed off to any type of experimentation that people do, but I think that the logistics of the 21st century, makes the Bay Area nobody's moving here anymore to do anarchy. Whereas just 5 years ago, people were like, everyone I know is moving here.
Yeah.
That 5 years, this was an epicenter, and watching it degrade from that position is sad for me as someone who's going to live here for a long time, going to continue to. But I can't wait to see St. Louis, become what it could become, or some other Midwestern town that's not here.
Yeah. I talked to Bellamy earlier, and he was wanting me to ask you about partisan tendencies within anarchy, especially as LBC would tend to be a less partisan project, which I think is hard to debate when you look at, if you would try to put every author into a room, it probably wouldn't be it'd be a pretty ugly scene at some point if you have, a lot, especially if you put a bunch of egoists and anarcho-primitives in a room, it's not going to work out so well most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I guess, do you just see LBC fitting into that broad segment wave category, and what is it meant to be a project that is willing? Would you call it amoral, or how would you describe it? That's a weird word, I guess, to use.
It's a pretty weird word to use. I mean, when you asked this question the first time, you asked it specifically in terms of talking about publishing POW and Bob Black.
Uh-huh.
And so that answer is about the nature of the modern reader to quote unquote celebrity, and also the modern reader who wants to be seen as being on the correct side of whatever fight it is that's happening. And so to the extent to which POW represents a fight about sexual consent, And Bob Black is about what is a snitch, and how much are we against them, and how much are we against them 20 years later. Then, then this is a conversation about the internet and to what extent should we celebrate the hostility that the internet represents. To which I say we should not celebrate that. The other direction is to say NICOM and disruptive elements are hostile texts to each other. They are not in the same family, which is why I refer to our content triangle being, right, SI or loosely stated anti-state communist, green, and insurrectionary nihilist. So all of these things exhibit this triangle, and this triangle is in some sort of set of negotiations with each other. That is why it's fair to refer to the second wave of anarchism, because they're in interaction with each other in a way that they're not with anarcho-syndicalists.
Yeah.
So that's our interest. The interest is in exciting content being sort of tied together by what we're doing, but I do get involved in the controversies. Just a couple weeks ago, we were talking about on Facebook that I was absolutely at the center. I revisited the Christian Williams conflict, which incited a lot of people to take the conversation that was meant to be light and fun, and to take it to be about denunciations and how fucked up we are to publish Bob Black.
Yeah.
And I find that way of thinking incredibly uninteresting. But they might be right. I mean, like, they're right in... Like, if our politics is about having the most right position and fighting against people who have wrong positions, they're more right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least it seems like a lot of the internet-y anarchy of reactionary communications seems to be an inability to sit with discomfort, which I think is something, it seems pretty inherent to an anarchist position. I guess you've been at it for much longer than me, so I don't know if you want to speak on what it's been like to inhabit that discomfort as in terms of the commodity. You clearly, we talked about a little bit earlier, working with the commodity, and just like, anytime anyone says anti-civ, and still, obviously, like, unless you're fully... You wouldn't know someone that was actually anti-civ in the embodiment of it, because they wouldn't be speaking to you. They'd be somewhere doing something else. Sure. So if you say that and you're talking to someone, you're clearly not inhabiting your politic. But right. So I guess more, what has that meant for LBC?
I think that this is is an endemic to talking about the beautiful idea in a world that is not beautiful. Like, in other words, all of these issues around LBC have been the conflict since I've become an anarchism, and I'm quite sure before. Mm-hmm. I actually just had a sort of fight, stupid fight. I moderate one of my internet projects is called the Anarchist Library. Uh-huh. It's an archive library site, and as a result of that website, I also host sort of a fan site for it on Facebook. And it's what's amazing about that group, by the way, 3,500 members. That's insane. By far my most successful project, quote unquote. Anyways, today someone was basically talking about how great Murray Boochin was, and how all the lifestylists that Murray Boochin called out in the late 90s have demonstrated how bad they are, whereas Murray Boochin was great. To which I basically said, you mean because anarchism was so powerful from the 50s to the 80s when Murray was around? And they basically said, yes. And so this is, of course, why it's so distracting. The internet is so distracting because obviously, like, on some level, why am I even participating in this? It's right. It's not my interest or goal. But, like, come on! Like, anarchism, like, come on! It's just ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. But anyways, I think I've lost your question.
No, that's totally fine. I'm just thinking about now whether the Red Scare was an anarchist project, maybe on some level.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Just really trying to purge out the communism. It was a post-left project back in the 50s. A very successful one, too, for the most part. I guess maybe we'll just take in different directions. Mm-hmm. So we talked about this earlier in the old Lost interview, but I was trying to figure out what what it means. Like, the concept of history is interesting to me. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about, you were saying in the study group before I was part of the study group, it's probably an ongoing thing about a type of conflict between historians and more idea-driven people, and what it means to exist in a history, or to affirm or not even attempt to affirm an anarchist history by publishing anarchy. And I guess general questions around that would just be, yeah, what does it mean to be part of history, making books that are sitting there for a long time, and are those things that are going to be able to be used for a while by people, or are they more ephemeral in nature if they're more specific? Or,
Well, I mean, there's so many different directions to take this conversation in. In the past, I've been hostile towards the historical nature of a lot of anarchism. You know, a lot of currently self-described anarchists also believe that the only good anarchist is a dead anarchist. So that's a depressing perspective to have when you're trying to be the publisher of currently living, vibrant, active anarchism, in addition to some things that happened before I was alive. So I would say that one of the most popular and best anarchist histories that many anarchists have read would be Emma Goldman's autobiography. It absolutely tells the story of a very different time than the one that we live in. It's compelling on a couple different levels. It's maybe not true,
yeah,
but it's a fantastic text. So for us, the project is current living the beautiful idea. As a consequence of that, we probably are making an impression of what is happening today that's historical. That's fantastic. I mean, on that level, like, wow, that's really neat. But most of those stories are not my story necessarily. And in the way in which history, of course, is, you know, capital H history, is like, that's not our project. Our project is a highly attenuated anarchist story.
Do you remember how you were explaining the study group in the first one? You kind of related it to this question.
Well, the study group used to have a conflict that this is the Berkeley Anarchist Study Group that happens every week at the Long Hall. The study group had a tension because there clearly were people who were there to read histories, full stop, and then over time they basically were supplanted by people who wanted to talk about ideas. We had like a 3-year period where all we did were all the Tikkun books and all the big post-structuralist author, and this was before a person that we know in common was even part of the group. Like, in other words, there was a period where it was like all philosophy and post-structuralism all the time. Continental theory. It was all continental theory. There was also, when I first came, there was a lot of Spanish Civil War. Like, we read multiple books just in the Spanish Civil War. We took field trips to see documentaries and speakers about Spanish Civil War stuff. So nowadays there isn't a sort of strong bias in either of those directions. And that's interesting to me because it's interesting to see what a new, you know, sort of grouping looks like in terms of their interests and what they're bringing to the table. And also, currently our reading group is older than it's ever been. In the past, we would have a set of people who would be in their early 20s, and then the older crowd who, you know, that obviously dominates the group. There also would be a lot of people who sort of would be chipping in with, like, let's read this, let's read that. Right now, the only people who are sort of picking their readings are the old timers.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm in my 30s and I feel like I'm on the younger side, so that says something. So one of the questions obviously I have is a very literal audience, like the audience for that would be listening. Anyone listening to this right now would be technically in the audience. For you, they have to get the book to be the audience. They have to get it in their hands. So
it's not precisely true. We try to offer a lot of our content. We do try to offer as a freely available something. So, like, a lot of things that we publish.
Like PDFs?
There are definitely some PDF options. A lot of our journals are available via PDFs. The original goal was to put out 6 journals a year, but it's looking more like 4 or 5. And then also, a lot of our content comes later to the Anarchist Library.
Yeah. So, what has that meant for you, or what type of relationship do you think LBC have you seen LBC have with their audience? Like in terms of like, is it a lot of people emailing or like giving like ideas, or is it mostly just been an internal thing with this on the side? Yeah, I think I was more just, I guess a lot of my questions just relate to the general like state of anarchy, because any project would be the state of anarchy. The situation that's going on would be to try to change that in some way or contribute to it,
Mm.
or push it in a different direction, or like insurrectionist project is like literally they would say steer this movement that they
Sure.
consider to have some anarchist tendency that is debatable, obviously, in their general direction, which would be whatever insurrection. And I guess I would describe the radio project as just trying to open up conversation and talk about things specifically with
Mm-hmm.
as people who are clearly in the middle of a very tenuous relationship with their ideas. And I guess how would you describe LBC in that way?
Well, I mean, we are a propaganda project to the extent to which we are trying to share our vision of what the anarchist discussion should look like. We're trying to steer people towards what we want to talk about, not towards what other people want to talk about. Um, but I think that what we have succeeded at is demonstrating the openness of the second wave of anarchism, anarchy. Um, in other words, the field that we've occupied has been large. Um, One of the challenges that I think speaks to this audience question is how do you speak to people in a way that they anticipate? I think a lot of people think that the content that you say is how you speak to people, and I'm not exactly sure that's true. That's right. I'm not exactly sure that people who consume media today are looking for the identical voices, and they're not looking necessarily to have their assumptions reaffirmed, or if they are, it's a sort of secondary goal. I think that so what we're really looking for are people who are open to the idea of letting our imagination run wild. Because for me, anarchism as a first principle is a project of imagination. It's not a project of a mass movement. It's not a project of a revolution. It's the idea of giving yourself permission to think wildly and then do wildly. So I think we've had some success along those lines, but um, it's an impossible project because you're basically saying how do you reach people that you don't know,
Yeah.
and how do you do it in a way that sort of is ethically appropriate? Because even if I may be an anti-moralist or whatever, I still live in a context where every action that LBC does, every action that I do outside of LBC, which I obviously have some other projects, like I get attacked every week, if not every day, by people who are basically examining the minutiae of our behavior and assaulting us for how inappropriate it is. So when you talk about this idea of audience, basically on the one side I have the puritanical nihilists who basically make some version of an argument that if you're not reaching out to people who already agree with you, you're fucked up. And on the other hand, I have the people who are I I want to use a precise. I don't just want to say leftist. I don't just want to say activist. But you have another set of people who are basically saying that we can do no good unless we're doing what they're doing, and therefore we should do nothing.
It seems like a clear, those two poles are the meet people where you are, meet people where they are type
Yeah,
thing.
right, exactly. And so, um, so figuring out how to navigate that takes a lot of energy because I actually do have feelings, and sometimes I get sad when when I realize that a lot of the work that I do is to an audience of sort of takers and haters rather than anything else. So this audience question is really bound up in a bunch of things we talked about in the first version of this, but is a lot of these questions are bound up in what are we capable of doing. And this is actually one of the places where I agree with the Invisible Committee far more than I agree with most North American radicals. I am very interested in the question of capacity. and what are we as individuals and as projects, what are we capable of doing, and are we doing that thing? And so that is a series of interesting questions, because by and large, most of our anarchist projects are not very capable.
Yeah.
And what Little Black Cart has shown is that if you have, if you get enough, a couple workaholics in a room, they actually can do an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, even just in Oakland in the last few years, it's easy to see the failures of things like the holdout, or what they were capable of, or what it takes to withstand certain attacks or tendencies coming at you, and like, do you need just what it takes to maintain a project, basically, because that project it wasn't even taken, they gave that project up, and I guess now we have the Omni, which is the other vaguely radical space without the long haul. The long haul being the other one in the Bay, obviously, and then so yeah, that the question of capacity is really interesting, because clearly we don't have the capacity for a revolution right now. I think that's like pretty unrealistic. Which, I mean, hopefully most people will be able to acknowledge that at least.
We don't even have the capacity to stop police from killing people willy nilly.
Right, I got in on Anarchist News recently, that to our friends thing. One of the things that the critiques people said was, well, the people got the police to stop killing people in Greece or something, and I was like, all right, I'm like, even if they accomplished that, like, is that something? Like, the police stopped murdering children was the thing, and I'm like, like, the bar for success at this point is so low, but people don't want to acknowledge it's low.
Sure,
like when we're writing communiques that say, we smashed windows, or like
glued locks,
or even the communiques I get excited about is like, we set off this, we tried to set off a bomb, it didn't detonate. I'm like, good on you, like, good try. Like, but it seems like it's so obvious what the situation is, but no one seems willing to, well, not no one, but like many people seem unwilling to acknowledge the situation, and trying to do a project in this space, which is this giant contradiction of like, anarchy is badass, but actually anarchists suck at blowing things up, and anarchists suck at having revolutions, and anarchists suck at running projects generally, because they fall to the ground for a variety of reasons, and what it means to try to like change that thing, even if you're just changing it from the space of trying to have what you would just define yourself, obviously, for success would be a successful media or propaganda project.
Right.
So, like, what are your outliers for success, basically, like, of a project, or not success, but not even so much successes, but as having something that feels, I don't want to say meaningful to the people that are doing it, but having something that feels like you're living your ideas in some way, basically, or that your project is somehow tied into the ways you want to be living.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, because the whole point of this project was to do what you're saying. So it has succeeded on that.
Yeah.
It continues to succeed on that, by that measure. And it's like, the point of LBC, and this is going to transition into the next part, but
sure.
We publish a book every month. We've now been doing it for a little over 3 years. We're going to do it for a total of 5 years. And then we will publish when titles come along that are appropriate. We'll be a bit more selective.
Uh-huh.
But the great thing about books, and the books that we've done so far, those books don't die after 5 years. Right? The internet, incredibly interesting conversations on the internet, have long since blown away. And so these books I will continue to be talking about and telling compelling stories about to people for years to come. Right? This is a project I'll continue to do the rest of my adult life. This is where I've landed. I'm a publisher of anarchist books, and so what that means is that it is an expression of all of the choices I've made over 20 odd years.
Yeah. So let's just jump into what's going on right now. What's LBC publishing? What's the next round of publishing looking like, and what are some titles that you're excited about, just to talk about a couple, maybe if you want to pick a couple books that you just want to talk about that are coming out and why you think they're worth reading.
So this is so we publish a book a month on a quarterly schedule. So we're about to publish 4 new titles, which is 3 books and a journal. So the journal is called The Bastard Chronicles, and this year the Bastard Conference which is the Chronicles of the Journal of the Conference. The Bastard Conference, its emphasis was on science fiction or
And other
utopias and other science fictions, or
yeah,
something
that's what
like
it was.
that.
Yeah.
Basically, science fiction was sort of the arc of the conference. So this journal will be a bunch of the presentations. I think that you're in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in there. Yeah.
You finish your piece
plug
in time?
myself. I did finish my piece. I was one of the first people to get in, but go ahead. Yeah.
Not a race.
Yeah.
the
Everything's a competition for me.
Yeah, I guess so. But so that's the journal that we're putting out this month. And so for people who can't make it at the conference, or for people who are interested in getting in text what they saw, that'll be there for people. We're doing a reprint of a Black and Red book. So Black and Red is one of our favorite publishers. They're from Detroit. They publish books like Against History, Against Leviathan, which I assume that you've read.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, not of course.
I just think you've heard me talk about it a bunch, but yeah.
Well, that wouldn't mean that also wouldn't mean you'd read it. But anyway, so one of the books that they wrote was the best way to describe it. Well, the book is called The Manual for Revolutionary Leaders.
Okay.
And if you know Black and Red, and if you know us, we would not publish a book called The Manual for Revolutionary Leaders. We don't believe in leaders. We don't believe that there's a manual. We probably don't believe in revolution.
Yeah.
So this book is a parody of that thing, of that approach, that worldview, that was actually picked up by people in the 70s who were sort of like of the statist communist variety as a real book.
So they put it as a parody, and then it came into the hands of people who didn't realize
exactly.
that. Wow.
So our hope for this book is for it to get picked up, and for us to find a way. Like we set up this new version of it in a way that we hope that it serves as a Trojan horse in the same way that they're booked in the 70s. So one of the ways in which we've done it is we haven't actually done it on the title, but in the introduction we basically said that the only flaw in this book is that in the 21st century, we no longer believe in revolutionary leaders. But in the 21st century, we believe in community. And so if we were going to rename this book today, we would call it the Manual for Revolutionary Community Leaders, which obviously speaks to some implied and explicit critiques that many of us share about the way in which leadership is being talked about in the identitarian left.
Following the leadership of the revolutionary community.
Right.
Which is thinly veiled. Easy to get to some Marxism there through that and some other things with the subject. But anyways.
Well, the heart of the book and the heart of the parody is that it's a very long, complex book, mostly with quotes derived from Hitler, Mao, etc. So.
Yeah. So what else is coming out next?
Right. So we're finally doing. So the essay, "The Abolition of Work" by Bob Black, has been out of print for decades. As you, I'm sure you know, Bob Black has burned the bridges between him and all of the publishers that he's had prior to us. And so I wanted to put "The Abolition of Work" back into print, and so as an intentional project, what we have done with it is that we have put together a compilation of all of Bob's writings around the topic of work, which he's written quite a bit about, and some of it's very different in style. As Bob has gotten older, he has become more of a writer that reflects his pedigree as a lawyer, and less of just a bombastic denouncer of others. There's a couple of those essays in there also.
Yeah.
Bob continues to be funny in that way, but there's also some really solid, well-researched, incredibly methodical articles about work from with a different voice. And so this book is called "Instead of Work," and it's basically Bob's contribution to the discussion about the anarchist attitude about work.
Cool. And then that was two. Is there one more?
Yeah. The third book is actually our second attempt at doing an art book.
Okay.
Art books are extremely difficult because, again, our audience does not have. It's not. It's not exactly for our audience. Like, the people who are the most excited about our books tend to be people who like the price and like the attitude. This is a book that's an art book about the German autonomy movement, and it's specifically about the poster art and just the sort of general aesthetic attitude that the autonomen had. And why that matters in North America is the autonomen are the people who sort of innovated and the technique that we call the black bloc. So this is about basically how they, to some extent, it's about how they did what they did in general, also how they did the black bloc.
Cool. All right. Is there? Do you want to let people know where they can pick up books and all that?
Yeah, I mean, you can always pick up our books at littleblackcart.com. This is our website. And you can also find URLs for us at lbcbooks.com, ardentpress.com, and basically if you have something like an anarchist info shop or center in your town, there's a very good chance that they have many of our books in stock. But we always have all of our books in stock at littleblackcart.com.
All right. Cool. Anything else you want to mention?
No, thanks a lot.
All right. Cool. Thanks, everyone.